Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Martin MacDonald. So this one I've been asking Martin to come on as a guest for what feels like years now. We met in 2018 where you were actually over here in Edmonton. And when you hear his accent, you'll understand why that was a very far trip. You presented at what was called the L2 Summit, along with icons then Sohee Lee, now Sohee Carpenter, Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, and Eric Helms, who will also be a guest again soon. He's been a popular guest. So, and for anybody who's not overly familiar with you, well, you're the founder of Mac Nutrition and MNU. You are a clinical performance nutritionist. You have a master's degree in performance nutrition, and you did a postgraduate in clinical nutrition. So, highly educated. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's really, I am sorry it's taken us so long, but I wasn't lying when I said you've been on the top of my to-do list for a long time. But it's really cool to come and talk to you because you reminded me that back in 2018, we were talking about some of this stuff in I guess, the early days of bringing this stuff to the light in the industry. And things have moved on a bit further now with it. So it's cool to come and talk to you about it.
And what we plan to talk about, well, there is a lot of industry dogma that large calorie deficits are somehow evil. They're bad. They're morally abhorrent. And they're also harmful, ineffective, and they cause things like metabolic damage. So I guess we can start here. Is the smaller calorie deficit, the slower weight loss approach better?
No. End podcast. I would argue. I spoke in Arizona. Was it Arizona? Phoenix, not long ago, and it was a big group of individuals. Which I imagine a lot of your listeners, because you've got quite a few. A lot of them will have no idea who I am. So it's nice that you gave me somewhat of an intro of like some education background, which I'll even say to your listeners is I don't hold that particularly highly. I don't think any one qualification can make or break someone. It's an attitude to learning. It's, too many people will do a degree or a master's or whatever. I know I've employed several people with PhDs and they kind of stop learning there. And there's only so much that typical academia will teach you. And so, this has been many years of work, reading the research to kind of come to where I am at this point, bringing this to light. But I spoke to at this audience who were completely unaware of me, really, and I said, look, if you had to pick one way to coach, you could only coach one way for the rest of your life. Every client, if you had to pick one, would you pick a moderate deficit? Or would you pick a more aggressive approach to dieting? And I said, you can't do the typical thing that people do, which is, okay, it depends. I said, this isn't a question of, and I didn't have this planned, but whenever I go to America, I know you can split rooms. There's certain people who may be a bit more offended a bit more easily. And, my humor in the UK comes across okay. But I said, it's not like when someone says, oh, if you had to pick one, missionary or doggy, which one would you pick? People go, oh, it depends. Sometimes I like to be choked and someone, and I'm like, whoa. And so everyone's like laughing. And I said, it's not one of these situations. There's one right answer and the right answer is missionary. But the point is in this question, there is one right answer, in my opinion. If you had to pick one, you have to go with the evidence. And I said, you know what? No one needs to be embarrassed here, because I said, if you put your hand up for moderate deficit, maybe that's because you only know how to coach that way. And that's the best way to work with your clients, the way that you can do a good job, because both can work. But if you had to pick one and you went only purely on the evidence and the physiology, I make the case that an aggressive diet is really the best way to do things. And of course, I'm sure you'll want to discuss it, but we could talk about different clients or different populations, different people, different situations where it might be more more or less appropriate. But on average, the more effective approach, and I'm sure we'll go into sort of the different factors of why this might be and what's important when you diet, aggressive dieting wins every time. And I'll just say one thing quickly is that people don't understand what aggressive dieting is. So I use this term, I've coined this term aggressive dieting, and it's different from rapid fat loss, because really, I think when you say the word rapid fat loss, it means very low calories, and it means you have to stick to the grammar, English grammar. Rapid, what does it mean? Things are going fast. Whereas my aggressive dieting protocol, and where this came from, the calculator that I created, maybe around the time I was in Edmonton, but the point of this is that you are dieting at the fastest physiological rate that you as a human, you as an individual, based on your anthropometrics and your data, can lose fat. So it's based on this concept that it's a rate limited process. You can't, if you eat 0 calories, we don't know whether your body can actually keep up with that demand on energy through through lipolysis, through the presentation of those fatty acids to the bloodstream, getting to the muscle, transferred into the mitochondria. There's somewhere on that process that we're rate limited. And so that's my aggressive dieting. That's really, if people need to remember that. I'm not talking about a 500 calorie diet or a 1,000 calorie diet. And some of the studies we might dig into do use those figures. And so what I've done really with my teachings and what's come out now, my aggressive diet blueprint, is the summation of really 50 years of research, taking the good and the bad. And you'll understand that in research, we can't do a kitchen sink approach, which we do with clients. We want to do everything right by them. We have to change one independent variable. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it wins every time, but it's even better because I'm sure we'll talk about muscle loss because everyone likes to be jacked. It will of course lose if you pick a 500 or 1,000 calorie a day diet versus a moderate approach. But if you do it my way, it will win.
I'll interrupt this episode for a quick but important side quest. While I don't think everybody needs to track nutrition all the time, tracking is one of the most powerful tools to make sure you're not eating too much or too little. And Macros First is my go-to app for me and my clients. Macros First has a free barcode scanner, and a premium version comes with a bunch of cool stuff to make managing your nutrition easier. Like 1, AI search. AI is everywhere now, where you can speak or type the foods you wish to save and log everything without having to search for each individual ingredient. 2, import recipes from a website. Save time creating recipes manually by importing all ingredients and instructions from your favorite recipe websites. No more searching for each ingredient one by one, just paste in the website. And 3, this one's a big one for nutrition coaches. Follow unlimited friends so you can follow all your clients. And there's a lot more cool features. You can try the premium version of Macros First free for 14 days. Just download Macros First from the App Store. And during setup, you'll be asked, how did you hear about us? Type in the code Andrew. So let's do the muscle loss fear first, because that's the commonly cited concern. And analogous to this, I recently had Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum on. He's a medical doctor, and he's very good when it comes to a lot of research. But we talked about what is probably more myth than reality about using GLP-1 agonist medications and more aggressive muscle loss. When, as he broke it down, anybody's interested, you can go listen to the episode. He does a good job with this. That the fat-free mass that was being scanned was not able to differentiate between the loss of liver fat and fatty acids in muscle tissue. So therefore, his interpretation of the research, and I think it's very sound, is that people didn't lose as much muscle as they thought. They still can, absolutely, in aggressive deficits, but they were actually preferentially losing more fat from your liver and your muscles, which is a very good thing. So there's a lot of fear mongering, and there always has been fear mongering about aggressive low calorie diets and muscle loss. So tackle that first.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you've actually mentioned GLP-1s, because I did a podcast on a fairly new paper that looked at an aggressive type approach. And to be honest, something that's not far from what you'd get, my calculator spitting out versus semaglutide. And they did a very aggressive ramp of semaglutide to make things fair, get hunger switched off as much as possible. And so they did 3 groups. So it was a wonderful study, semaglutide versus, we'll call it an aggressive diet type protocol, and them combined. And the aggressive diet protocol smashed semaglutide, even on its own, for fat loss. And there was no added benefit of semaglutide plus aggressive diet for fat loss, and other than some beta cell function, which we know semaglutide, these GLP-1s, they came from the diabetes arena long before the sort of obesity medicine stuff. So by the by, yes, if your doctor's talking to you about GLP-1s and you're type 2 diabetic, there's a different discussion there. But for fat loss, what's amazing was the aggressive diet approach was better than GLP-1. But what's super interesting is GLP-1 didn't improve the adherence. So that was my thinking when I sort of saw this, was like, yeah, even thinking these days, GLP-1s aren't the be all and end all. You can, a little bit like when we talked about sort of gastric bands and balloons and this sort of stuff, people could get around them. You started to see clients finding tricksy ways to consume their favorite chocolate. And I thought, well, GLP-1 plus my approach, that would be, aggressive dieting on steroids, aggressive dieting on GLP-1s. But in this randomized control trial, they showed that actually there's no greater, the end result is plus or minus. It was about 12 point something kilograms of fat loss in the aggressive diet group. And I think that was more than double the semaglutide group on its own, but it was within a few hundred grams when they combined both. But just to say, yeah, on your point there, because that was, they were looking specifically at fat loss. So with the muscle gain stuff, the muscle loss for me, I think this is where not to kind of talk about my calculator too much, the whole point of what I created, and actually I'll tell some of the background of this comes from my article in Alan Aragon's research review back in 2014, 15 or something like that, where I talked about, I think it was called something like the optimization of the process of dieting to single digit body fats, something like that. And essentially, I'm a maths guy. I love maths. And that's really where I sort of say my aggressive diet blueprint, I've not really created anything. I've just made 50 years of research understandable, palatable, and actionable, but then combine that with a bit of maths, which is where I excel and can help coaches to create something usable, to use some of the really complex mathematical modeling that goes behind this to spit out these clever numbers. And what it does is and I did this very basically in an Excel spreadsheet for my article. And I said, this is how fat loss would look for someone dieting. I can't remember what they started at, but maybe 15% body fat coming down to 9%. And I showed the change in, and there was certain assumptions like we were weight training, we had a sufficient protein intake, these things. And it's this decaying curve of fat loss, which I think a lot of people don't realize, that as you get leaner, you need to diet slower. Your deficit needs to be lower. And that's the point to your question, is the reason people lose muscle with any aggressive approach are really 3 reasons. They don't train properly. If they don't train properly, that's obviously going to make them more likely. There's a really funny study out there. It's a case study, and I know the person who did it. The study is their submission for their PhD, and I find it laughable. He has a PhD because of this study. They basically dropped out all heavy resistance training and basically made this bodybuilder do circuit classes to like burn fat. After the podcast, I don't want to call them out live. I'm happy to call lots of people out live, but just not on this occasion. But basically using circuit training for bodybuilding, he lost muscle, and it was like, well, no wonder he had no stimulus. You just cut it all out. Anyway, so training, protein intake, if that drops too low, which for me is one side of the GLP-1 data, which is sort of under discussed. I think the fear mongering is like these drugs are mechanistically increasing muscle loss. And as far as my understanding goes, there's absolutely no mechanism by which that occurs. So you've had an expert and he said that. So that's cool. We agree. But there is a mechanism by which if someone, I sometimes try and explain GLP-1s to people a bit like morning sickness, or just not that you and I have had that, but that kind of nausea is a huge side effect of them. And even those who wouldn't necessarily report feeling nauseous, it's just, I do not want to eat. It's a kind of fullness that they haven't experienced before. And it's kind of like, oh, like it may be a hungover feeling or something. It's just like food isn't really feeling. Now, when you feel a bit sick, what do you feel like eating? Do you want to eat a chicken breast, or do you want to eat just some bread or some carbs and something that's just easy to eat? Because I want to eat and I still like what that effect that has on my body, but I don't necessarily eat chicken.
I think the best example would be you've eaten a good Thanksgiving dinner, turkey, all the veggie stuffing, what have you. You're full. Pie comes out. And James Krieger's talked about this before with me, sensory specific satiety, right? Nice. But are you going to sit down and eat another, especially a piece of dry turkey without cranberry? Not appealing at all. But some pumpkin pie comes out, some apple pie comes out. You've got room for it. I'm confident that's probably what that feels like. Yeah,
nice. So this is another reason if we are just giving patients GLP-1s and they are, there's no macro control here. This isn't what's happening in the research. They're not being given diets. They're maybe being coached a little bit with regards to healthy food choices, but there's no, you're going to hit 1 point whatever grams per kilogram protein. That doesn't happen. So if people are dropping their protein right down to, lower levels, that's going to be a potential confounder there. And then the final one is if people do drop their calories so low that they are, that the body cannot simply keep up with the energy deficit through fatty acid mobilization. And so that's where I think my calculator comes in, and it's unique, is muscle loss will not happen because you are literally calculating that exactly where you can go. So I did a profile. Are you aware of Steve Hall, Revive Strong?
Yeah, he's been a guest on the podcast not too long
amazing
ago. In fact. He's great.
Cool. So I did a profile on him to show him and his listeners to really discuss this point. And I got him to send me all his data. And sorry, I didn't do that with you actually. But we talked about what he would do naturally because he is a really meticulous tracker, and I'd love to have his dedication to anything in life. But he, it came out he was about 1,800 calories. That was the absolute minimum he could eat. And I was like, that's the most aggressive my calculator will go for you based on your current all the data you sent. And he was like, oh, okay, like doesn't feel too aggressive. That's not what people would typically have in their head if they're thinking you're aggressive dieting. And again, with my calculator, I've got because there are some estimations involved in this stuff. So there's like a muscle loss adversity factor that I allow people to kind of select so that, if you select this one, muscle loss just isn't going to happen. But if you go here, a little bit could happen, and there's a little range. So that's one caveat that, if you do it my way, you are literally calculating where that should be. And actually in my case study in the Alan Aron's research review, the deficit that someone was allowed to be in, this particular client I'd made up, was something like 380 calories. Now, people going, oh, you need to increase, you need to drop calories more because, weight loss has slowed down and we're trying to peak for the show and blah, blah, blah. But the calculator says no more than 330, no more than 350, whatever calorie deficit. You go above that, every single calorie above that is lean body mass loss. So for a short period of time, you can deal with a bit of lean body mass loss because that's coming from things like glycogen. So plenty of that weight loss is coming from lean body mass, but we're not talking myofibrillar proteins that we're losing, which is what we really care about. And so it just shows that, yeah, muscle loss is going to happen in some people if you're super lean. And again, in some of the aggressive dieting research, we see that. I think it's a 2010 paper, like Hoovenan. But essentially, they split the subjects out into those who were less than 10% body fat whilst they were doing a higher calorie deficit. And there was a correlation with that with greater muscle loss. So it was like, yeah, those leaner individuals, they're more at risk. They're not actually more at risk if they adhere to the principle that I've talked about there, which is being able to calculate that. And I'll just say one more thing on this point. The same thing that people criticize GLP-1s for, muscle loss, the difference is with GLP-1s versus not using GLP-1s is people actually manage to lose weight on GLP-1s. And we know when you actually manage to lose weight, you lose some lean body mass too. Some fat-free mass goes with that. Whereas when you compare it to, oh, this group, they lost way less muscle. It's like, yeah, and they lost way less fat as well. When you look at a lot of the studies, when you just compare relative, what percentage of the weight loss was muscle that they lost, it actually becomes much more even Stevens. And so, like, yeah, some fat-free mass loss will occur with any dieting. And it's not even necessarily myofibrillar proteins we're losing. Some of that fat-free mass, like I said, glycogen, but also just some of the structure that's holding our adipose tissue in our body and stuff, we'll lose some of that. So all sorts happens. But yeah, the muscle loss is a bit of a boogeyman. I've worked with many clients over the years who are like, oh, I want you to help me lose fat. And some of these guys are personal trainers. I want you to help me because every time I diet, all the good lean mass I've put on in last year's bulk, I just end up back at the same weight. And I'm like, yeah, because that was fat. That's how much fat you had. And people just trick themselves. They're like, I put on 14 pounds in my last season's lean bulk. I'm like, no, you didn't. You maybe put on a pound of muscle. Like, you're a natural athlete with 8 years of training experience. You didn't put on lean. Like, it doesn't happen. So yeah. I really think muscle loss is a huge boogeyman, but it can happen in extreme situations.
All right, so break down the advantages of the more aggressive approach that you advocate for.
Yeah. So I think the key approach, which is the baffling one, which is the USP, it's the one I love because I feel like it's something I've brought to the evidence-based industry, because we all know the evidence-based industry, we're small, we're poor compared to the charlatans. They've got millions more followers, they've got millions more dollars and pounds. There's lots of evidence-based people who are doing well for themselves, but on average, we're screwed because what we sell is boring, it sucks, it's not as sexy. But being able to bring to people this, you will lose fat at the absolute fastest rate possible for you, whilst hunger will go away. That's the huge one where it's like, what? Yeah, you're going to be less hungry and you're going to lose fat way faster than on a moderate deficit, which is demotivating, it's boring, it's easily undermined by being a human, by misreporting, not quite tracking, etc. But you will be way less hungry. And because you are way less hungry, you will adhere more. And then because you adhere more and you are losing fat at a much faster rate, you will be more motivated. So it's like a trifecta: motivation, rapid results, big increase in adherence because of that rapid results, and the fact that you've not got something pulling you away from adherence and results, which is hunger. So the hunger thing is massive, and I'll say at this point, some of my aggressive diet blueprint is free and available for people. And you can essentially just create an account, get onto the blueprint, and there's some free lectures there. And one of those that I created is called like the TLDR. Too long, didn't read. It's the whole of part 2 of the blueprint. There's 9 parts. There's there's, I don't know, there's maybe 100 different sessions in there. But in part 2, I basically talk about all the research, all of the benefits, all of the reasons you might be scared of. So muscle loss, one of them's eating disorders, one of them's damaged metabolism, one of them's hunger adherence, all of them. And I basically made the case. I displayed the research and the thinking and the reasoning behind some of the myths. So one of the things is, well, I'm hungry on a 500 calorie deficit, and the research, there's a really cool paper, Coutinho et al. 2000 and something, 10, 12, something or other, 14, who, and people want to read this. This is such a cool paper because they went to a great extent actually measuring appetite at the different phases. So at weight maintenance, when you go into an aggressive deficit, or when you go into a normal calorie deficit, the absolute normal response is that hunger goes up. Normal. You go in from a 500 calorie deficit, you go into 1,000 calorie deficit, and hunger goes up even more. So the logical thing there is, well, okay, 500 a bit of hunger, 1,000 more hunger, 1,800, 2,000 calorie deficit, more hunger than I can handle. But the interesting thing is, what actually seems to happen is it goes hunger up, and then hunger gone. And this is measurable based on, subjective ratings, but also based on our, our hunger hormones, these gut hormones that we're aware of, ghrelin, CCK, etc., PPY. And so what's really cool about the Coutinho paper is it goes weight maintenance, and then, moderate deficit, appetite goes up. Aggressive deficit, your appetite is lower on an aggressive deficit than it is at maintenance calories. It's not just lower than at a 500 calorie deficit. It's lower than maintenance, which is just mind boggling until you've done an aggressive diet. I use this term utopia, and it's basically, you want to get to utopia, and the blueprint's set up to get you to utopia as quick as possible. And it's so cool to see. I did my aggressive diet tour, whenever it was, maybe last year, maybe it was the year before, and just went around Australia, Singapore, Vegas, the UK, some dates, and every single time, half the audience is always trainers or these types. And they would come to me and say, I don't buy into it. I don't believe you. I believe you because I trust you and I've seen the evidence, but I just do not think it's going to work. And they say, especially for me, they just said, I love food. I'm really hungry sort of person. I remember one girl in Australia said, I'm a relatable personal trainer. I get my client struggles. I love food. I'm not a 6-pack abs type personal trainer girl. I love exercise and I eat well, but I do love my food, and dieting is not for me. But I'm going to try this approach because if it works for my clients, I want to have experienced it. And she goes away and she does it. And she's like, do you have swearing on your podcast?
Absolutely. I encourage it.
Yeah. She's like, fuck you, mate. She's like, she's like, Martin, it worked. And she's just like, I can't believe it. My hunger's gone. I can't believe it. And I have an aggressive diet community, people just posting in there. It's like, they're like, I don't know what utopia is going to feel like. I don't know if I'm in it. I don't know if I'm like, just wait. And then one day they'll go on.
Anecdotally, I think I might be
Yeah.
able to give sort of a perspective on this. So I think there's two
Nice.
kind of things that we hear as anecdotes. One, the commonly, oh, I'm having the boogeyman 1,200 calorie deficit, or sorry, 1,200 calorie total,
Diet. Yeah.
and I'm starving, But what's really going on is we know that, this has been well studied. These people are actually probably eating 2,200 calories. They're
Yeah.
eating way more than they think they are. Or if they are somewhat restricted during the week, then they're binging and eating over on the weekend. So
Yeah.
maybe they're in a slight deficit, maybe they're not in at all, but their psychological and physiological experience is hunger. Now, what happens when we get the occasional person who goes and starts fucking around with keto or fasting, and they actually restrict fairly aggressively? And there's other reasons why this stuff may not be sustainable as a practice, but what do they often report? Not being very hungry. So I
Yeah.
think anecdotally, what we have is we have people either ending up in the camp, one of the two camps you described, which is moderate deficit where hunger is high, or the more aggressive deficit for whatever construct or dietary ideology they found it within, and they actually probably entered the state where, hey, hunger has now been blunted. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, and I love that you said it, because people come to me and say, "Oh, can I just do your protocol? But I want to just do it for 5 days, and then I just want my weekends off." And I'm like, "Well, you can do that if you want. There's such a thing as the 5-2 diet, um, and you'd be doing the sort of 2-5 diet, neither of which are aggressive dieting, and neither of which have the unique benefits, and neither of which will fit inside the entire protocol I've built for you and you've paid for. But if you want to do it, knock yourself out. You're going to starve for 5 days, not feel very good. It's going to be shit, and then you're going to eat too much, and then you're going to be, any reduction in hunger you had over the 5 days will probably be reset, and you're just going to go again. So you're going to hate life, and it's bullshit. So don't do it." um and you'll also maybe give yourself, some binging tendencies, which is exactly what I've worked so hard within the blueprint to help people not have. um and there was two people really in the last 6 months who said that, and they were like, "Yeah, it's dumb. I'm not going to do it. Thank you very much for bringing me back on track here. I was trying to be cheeky." So with it is important to realize that you get to utopia really around depending on the individual, depending on how many times you've done it, depending on a few different factors, maybe 3 to 7 days, you'll hit utopia. And um and then it's just plain sailing. Then it's like, oh my God, like a deficit has never been easier. Through my years and years of competing in natural bodybuilding, I really became pathologically afraid of hunger. I just, and really one of the reasons, other than being not very genetically gifted, that I quit the sport, but ended up with very disordered eating, maybe a very mild eating disorder. And it took a long, long time for me to repair my relationship with food. And I I just didn't want to be hungry. So then I sort of have really moved towards this way of dieting, plus being a little bit of an all or nothing person. It sort of suited that side of my psyche. But you don't need to be an all or nothing person at all. You're going to lose fat as fast as you possibly can without hunger. You're going to get results. You're going to be motivated. You're going to have things in place, stops in place that are good for your health. And on top of that, I guess it's not just a mathematical situation. With the blueprint, there are things, it's a whole multi-phasic strategy. So, there's different lengths of times you'll be dieting. There's certain factors within it. There's a whole preparation protocol and calculator, prior to doing this. And we're not just starving ourselves. Based on some people's physiology, you plug your data. So in 1.0, version 1.0 of my calculator, which thousands and thousands of people downloaded, and there's a good few threads on Reddit about it. I remember Greg Knuckles. Are you aware of Greg?
Greg's been a guest in the past and spoken at my conference in 2019. So Greg's great. Yes.
Amazing. So people were going, "Greg, what do you think of this guy? What do you think of what he's saying? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Can you believe he's saying this?" And Greg was like, "Yeah, I actually agree with everything he said, and it is super cool." Like I've sort of met Greg at the Epic Fitness Summit, and obviously he's just like a super geek. So to have someone like that going, everything he says is correct, was really nice to, it's people sending me the links. But in version 1.0, people were punching in their data, and it was saying like you should eat 100 calories a day, because based on their situation, it was, this was literally a 5-hour project, and it wasn't supposed to be like, I'm not selling this or anything. It's just like, hey guys, this is the calculator that I discussed on some podcast at some point in the last 9 years. But based on their physiology, their body was able to, let's say their maintenance calories were 2,600 calories, let's say, TDEE. The calculator was then going, your body would be able to supply a 2,300 calorie deficit with fat. So you can eat 300 calories a day and supply that all with fat. What that's doing is forgetting that at 300 calories a day, they are not getting sufficient nutrients in various parameters. Let's go back to protein because it's the easiest one to discuss. So obviously the calculator now has certain stops in place. So for some people, whether they pick, fastest approach, crazy, I want to lose fat, I don't care about muscle loss, or they pick slow and steady, which is still relatively fast, the number doesn't change, because what the calculator's saying is, yeah, you're not even hitting. You could even increase your output through a few more steps and those sorts of things. And that would happen is you would lose fat faster, but your calories wouldn't change because you're at the stops. I've programmed these stops in place so that certain different things are taken care of, with regards to people's health, with regards to muscle loss, those sorts of things. So yeah, the real benefits, I haven't got them like plugged into my brain, but it's the hunger is the massive thing. It's the rapid fat loss. It's the adherence. The motivation of seeing those results are, what more do you want from fat loss than that? And then it's the absence of negatives that's the other benefits. Anything that someone says, well, it's going to give you an eating disorder, not evidence-based, and we can discuss that. It's going to, cause metabolic damage. Metabolic damage doesn't exist, but it's going to cause metabolic adaptation. Well, no, it doesn't to any greater extent than moderate deficits, and we can discuss that. Another one is, well, you've lost weight fast, so the research shows that if you lose weight fast, you'll regain it quickly.
Let's
Also
do that
not
one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Let's dive into that, and I'll pull you back through the other ones. Yeah,
nice one. That is the best one, so I'm glad you picked up on that one. Again, it's one of these things. I didn't say this at the beginning, but one of the reasons we hate, as an evidence-based industry, we hate the idea of an aggressive diet is because, when you and me were early in the industry, you had people like Herbalife. As I don't really hear of them. I know they're still there and whatever, but Herbalife was the version that people saw of like, well, that's the aggressive diet. It's a shake diet. It's just liquid calories. It's low calorie. It's, it's terrible. We definitely don't want that. We want a sustainable approach. And that's what people, I think, often, if anyone's like triggered by hearing me talk about some of these numbers, that's what they're relating this to this unsustainable, or even worse, like is it maple syrup diet? It was like Beyonce did. Was it maple syrup and cayenne pepper or something, and whatever, just silly stuff over the years. And so when we relate it to that, and we see our friend or someone we know who's crash dieted and then put it all back on, we just have this really negative view towards this like get rich quick or lose fat quick scheme. And we don't apply the 50 years of research that is sitting right there in front of us going, wow, do you know what? It seems that aggressive deficits for literally decades have outperformed moderate deficits on every parameter, including weight loss maintenance. Bring me back to that one. I should have a pen and paper here. Including weight loss maintenance. So with regards to the weight regain stuff, when I talked about some of the premises of like, why do people believe these things? It was like, okay, because we have this feeling towards terrible weight loss approaches. However, you can pluck at some research. And I'm annoyed actually because it's almost going back to me. If I remember the study paper, people can go look at it. But it's essentially it's through the whole body of literature that weight regain is strongly correlated to the amount of weight you lose. So so it's the GLP-1 situation again. It's and it's the Mettler et al. Studies and the where we're comparing, moderate deficit versus large deficit and various parameters on testosterone and um, uh, vertical jump height. And what they're doing is they're just comparing apples and oranges. It's like if you aggressive diet, you're only dieting for half to a quarter of the time, but losing the same amount. And the problem is people use the data at 4 weeks, despite the fact that the aggressive diet group has lost double the amount of weight. So it's like, oh, well, their testosterone went down. It's like, yeah. And they dropped twice the body fat. Make the other group match on body fat loss and tell me where their testosterone's gone to. I think that's Garth et al. That looked at that. And again, you see people quoting these studies. Moderate deficits are best. Read Garth et al. No, it's not. It's a 4 versus 8 weeks. It's the wrong thing you're comparing. So, weight regain is not correlated. And I use this rubber band theory for people because what's making us regain weight is these metabolic adaptations. It's if you've got any sort of belief, I don't think it's really a belief, but if you buy into any of the set point or settling point theory, which I think we're all on board that one of those theories is it's showing what's happening in real life. We have this settling point, and Kevin Hall's work is phenomenal on this. But if we look at, like, think of it like a rubber band. So if you've got a rubber hand in one hand and you pull on that rubber band, the potential energy that's being created in that rubber band to flick it, that's the strength of your body fighting back against you. And that's a very good, Kevin Hall's paper on the different set point theories talks about, well, actually, is it pulling or is it pushing? And I'm like, I'm not clever enough to understand the difference on whether it's pulling or pushing. I don't care. All I know is that my body is trying to make me gain body fat. But that pressure, whether I pull my rubber band quickly or whether I pull that rubber band slowly, it's the exact same potential energy. And so if people don't know that because they've not been kids and played with rubber bands, go home and do that. I actually did that in Australia in 2019 on my world tour. I was talking about rubber bands, and everyone in the audience had like blank faces. And I was like, do you guys know what a rubber band is? I was like, one of these things that, and they just didn't know. And I don't know if that's an Australian thing or they're just all morons, but we're talking like 250 Australians. So there must have been someone. But anyway, this girl in the front goes, do you mean a glute band? And I was like, no, I don't mean a glute band. But that's the same premise. Go and get a glute band and stretch it and fire it. So anyway, that's the premise. Weight regain is not correlated to speed of weight loss. It's just not. And if any of your listeners want to go out and just, they want to try and prove me wrong, please do. I'd love to see any study ever that shows that the speed of weight loss in a controlled fashion is versus a moderate deficit, the weight regains faster when weight loss is equated. So we know that if you lose weight, Kevin Hall's paper on appetite, with every kilogram of weight loss that someone of fat that someone loses, their appetite increases to the order of, and it's very nice and clean, 100 calories. So you think about your client who loses 10 kilograms, 22 pounds in American money, is 1,000 calories hungrier than they were before. And so these are some of those metabolic adaptations. Metabolic adaptations are not just reduction in metabolism. It's these other factors like increased appetite and decreased satiation for the same number of calories consumed that just create this shitstorm that is the world of weight loss maintenance. It's the one thing we really, as an industry, have not solved in any way, shape, or form. It's how do you, other than GLP-1s to some extent, but we're talking lifelong medication. But weight regain is just not correlated. So I would love to go, oh, this study compared this and this, and they're different. But that's when you talk about weight loss maintenance. If we look at studies it'll come to me, but essentially 6 months on a moderate deficit versus 12 weeks on a or no, 8 weeks on an aggressive deficit. Begins with F. Anyway, and then comparing that, looking forward. Essentially, what we want for our clients is we want them to be 5 or 10% weight reduced. Those are some two really nice markers in the stand. Obviously, we would love people to just maintain all their weight loss. But when we look at the research on how much weight loss are people maintaining, it's the ones that are losing weight the fastest that are maintaining a greater percentage of their weight loss at 1 year, 2 years, 7 years post. So when people talk about, what parameters it win on, I'm like, what parameters does it not win on? Like, it just wins on everything. And, it's easier to do. You maintain more of the weight loss. And again, I think I'll come back to as well. My blueprint is set up in it. It's 20 years of my work. I've never written a protocol before in my life. I've always been super nutrition agnostic. With Mac Nutrition Uni, our qualification, it's just pure agnostic. It's here's evidence, here's how to work with people, here's the behavior change, here's all of this different stuff. But it's work with the client in front of you, however that works for them and you, and client-centered approach. But the aggressive dieting stuff for fat loss, because obviously with Mac Nutrition Uni, people are qualified to work with, athletes and body composition and health. But with purest fat loss situations, aggressive dieting just wins time and time and time again.
We'll give everybody an offer at the end of the episode if they want to dig more into your stuff. But
yeah,
we got a lot more ground to cover, so this will be a long episode today. Okay, I suspect one of the big reasons why people see better sustained results on shorter, more aggressive protocols is, you mentioned this a couple times earlier, they see more success immediately. And I think that's motivating. Success begets sustained effort and further success.
Yeah.
I would love to hear you talk about that. And perhaps also we should probably go into, because again, people are going to cite all the people who yo-yo diet, which is the vast majority of the data over time. It's where this sort of mythical number, what is it, 95 or 99% of people regain the weight, and people use it as a justification not to lose it in the first place, which is bullshit. It's just that the people who do it in problematic ways are vastly overrepresented. So the parameters that you're talking about, and maybe we can define some of those key parameters. What do people need to do to make sure they're maintaining their weight loss?
Yeah. So with where to start? So, I mean, this is the entire part 9 of the blueprint, which I never thought was going to be in there, is lifelong weight maintenance. So it ended up becoming such a more epic part. And, as people got this, they had the blueprint and then they saw this and they were like, do you know what? This should have been part 1. There's so much sort of wisdom here and research and understanding of what needs to be done. And so I'll try and summarize some of the things that I talk about there. One of the key things is what the research seems to suggest about intermittent energy restriction. So you'll be aware of the MATADOR study. That's kind of like the first of its kind. Are you aware of that one? Where it was like
No,
2 weeks.
I'm not familiar. At least I don't think off the top of my head. So
yeah. So and is it Jackson Pios has done some of the work since then? But MATADOR study was essentially, I believe they did 12 weeks of dieting. So MATADOR stood for something like metabolic adaptation or regain, something or other study. And what was super interesting is just the results of this study. Basically, one group, I think, dieted for 2 weeks. Yeah, I think this was it. And then had 2 weeks off. And then dieted for 2 weeks and 2 weeks off, dieted for 2 weeks. Or it was 2 and 1, either or. And the other group just dieted straight through for 12 weeks. The same diet. So it wasn't aggressive and not aggressive. This is just the same diet, but you're only dieting for essentially half the time, give or take. And the group that only dieted for half the time either got, I mean, I've not read it for so long because it's not that cool a paper when you know the punchline. Because at the time I was geeking out on this study because I was like, oh my goodness, they've found a way to undermine metabolic adaptation. It must be maintaining NEAT, it must be boosting, it must be maintaining leptin or T3, who knows? And it turns out that the subjects that were only dieting 2 on 2 off or whatever it was, just adhered during their 2 weeks. And the people on the 12 weeks, as we know, it sucks to diet every day for 12 weeks. So results taper off. So you blast for 2 weeks, you nail it because I'm going to be back to maintenance after this and it's cool, I'm chilling. And so they had whatever it ended up being, a decent, maybe it was an 8-week study and it was 1 week on, 1 week off. That rings more bells now. Shall I, do you care that much? I'm just going to type it in.
Please dig it in.
Cool.
See if you can find it.
But yes, because I believe it was just a month. Here we go. So 2018, MATADOR, and it stands for Minimizing Adaptive Thermogenesis and Deactivating Obesity Rebound. What a cool name. But anyway, MATADOR study. So 16 weeks. Goodness, I got it wrong that many times. It was continuous for 16 weeks. And then it was, like I said, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So, there you go. So anyway, the point is, all the way back to that study, forget that study. Since then, we've had more and more and more data coming out that seemingly intermittent energy restriction works really well. And anyone who's worked with clients, anyone who knows the data on food diaries, it's just like things start to creep in. Things fall off. It's hard to maintain that level of specificity for 12 weeks. Bodybuilders and fitness industry people do it all the time, but that's because they're sad. But, I was a bodybuilder for however many years, 5 years competing. I did it. I adhered to a horrible deficit. I had no friends, no social life, no sex drive, no anything. And I got shredded. But I was a loser. And that's kind of like me calling my friend Steve Hall a loser. But it's a different kind of human being. And the fitness industry, again, I'm a personal trainer. It's like, you're on your feet all day long. You love it. You having abs sell stuff. You've got motivation. Someone with a real life and a real job. I'm just being unnecessarily provocative now. But, someone with children and other responsibilities who doesn't need to be lean for their job and isn't active for their job, et cetera, et cetera. They're a different kettle of fish than, quote unquote, us. So this situation of intermittent energy restriction seems to suit that really, really well. Now, the other cool thing within the data is something called disinhibition. And it seems that disinhibition is exactly what we don't want. Disinhibition is essentially we're disinhibited from so alcohol is the easiest explanation of this. It removes our inhibitions. And so, alcohol isn't this magical hormonal storm that makes you gain loads and loads of fat. Yes, it has calories, so that's one part of the equation, and then not satiating calories. Yes, I'll have some very small hormonal impacts depending on how much you drink, etc. A huge part of it is the disinhibition that comes around it. So if you're dieting and you have some alcohol, it's like, well, you know what? I don't normally eat doner kebabs, but they look really good right now. And so, we have this, or cheesy chips is another one. But disinhibition occurs with dieting. So, and prolonged dieting. So we become more disinhibited towards food. And so again, people in the fitness industry, very good at restriction. But when you ask an audience of fitness professionals, who here, if I said to you, eat at maintenance calories, and I gave you a specific diet to eat, who would struggle to just stick to that diet because, well, I'm at maintenance and actually I'm a bit more hungry and actually I've got more flexibility here. So I want a bit of this and it's kind of like when people go on like maintenance breaks, anyone who's gone, go on a diet break, go to maintenance, people just go off the rails. But they can adhere to a restriction and they don't actually realize this is the fitness industry normalizing disordered eating behaviors. Like we've all been there, we've all done it. It's like, oh yeah, I'm better at restriction, I don't want to jump back to maintenance, that feels uncomfortable. So but disinhibition gets greater and greater as people diet. So a multiphasic approach. So with my aggressive diet blueprint, I typically recommend people don't aggressive diet for longer than say 3 to max really 5 weeks. Now it's very difficult for me to, and I say this in the blueprint and I say this now, it's very difficult for me to actually um, be heavily reference those numbers, those weeks. And I literally just say, do you know what? More than 5 just makes me uncomfortable. That's it. I've read all the data and I can't come up with something particularly evidence-based. And I've read the data where people have been on 490 calories for 12 weeks, on 800 calories for 6 months. They have done an entire, do you know, Mr. AB? People, it's a cool study that people tend to mention. Mr. AB, the 385-day fast, in complete fast, he went from something like 405 pounds to, I don't know, 190 pounds.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar with this. Yeah. Yeah. I remember
Yeah,
this one.
cool. Mr. AB. And he, 5 years later, he was maintaining within 5 kilos. So again, the whole, you will rebound, you'll regain all your weight. Well, Mr. AB didn't. And that's the most aggressive diet I've ever heard. There's actually one, there's a 1967 paper, which is an even more aggressive than that. And it's something like 450 total days. In fact, I think it was, he did alternate day fasting. So he did a complete fast and then 1,000 calories a day the next day, every day for like 2 years. It's something crazy. But you get those studies and go, well, okay, well, he's maintaining it and not regained it all. He's not metabolically adapted or metabolically damaged, et cetera, et cetera. And these could just be black swans, but they tell us something about this situation. We've got all of this research with people dieting longer. But the key thing that those studies don't look at is follow-up necessarily. And in my opinion, if someone, and this is where I'm drawing data from lots of different areas of research, not least of all this intermittent energy restriction research. Likewise, with my aggressive diet calculator, it also has a refeed calculator. So for many years when people said to me, when should you refeed? And I was like, I don't know. I don't think you necessarily need to. I'm not really convinced that they do a great deal with regards to fat loss. Back when I was bodybuilding, you were having a cheat meal or a cheat day once a week. And, I absolutely feel sick using the word cheat now. It's just the most vile terminology. But we'll call it a refeed meal or whatever. And, you need this day to boost your metabolism and blah, blah. And it's like, no, it doesn't do that. The research clearly shows that doesn't happen. And actually, it probably takes about 72 hours of continuous overfeeding to have any impact on T3 or leptin or any of these things that you might be trying to boost. And then you've been overfeeding or at least feeding at maintenance for 3 days, and you've not really got that far ahead. So you probably would have been better just to carry on dieting for 3 days. But the benefits are psychological. But I think when people start talking about cheating, that's terrible for your psychology. But if it's like, well, I'm going to have a maintenance day, I'm going to have a refeed or whatever, cool, that's fine. It's a bit more healthy attitude. But within the aggressive diet blueprint, it's the refeed is 2 things. One, calculated, because there is a point where if you're dieting and you are doing any glycolytic work, and really we'll just call it resistance training, you're going to be using a little bit of carbohydrate glycogen in some of those training sessions. And over time, getting very, very depleted just puts us closer to muscle loss territory. So the calculator basically works out when that'll happen, whether it's day 17, day 35, day 85, and it'll say, this is when you should refeed. And for some people, that figures like day 300 because they have loads of body fat and then they're only training twice a week and they're nowhere near the 100 calories that it would tell them to eat if it didn't have my stops in place. So for those people, I say to you, no, you can maybe go on to your 5 weeks if you want to. But then I want you to ask yourself and be reflective. Is it good for you to just go pedal to the metal for 12 weeks on, 700 calories a day, whatever the calculators told you, from a psychological standpoint? Because this is a lifelong thing and we want to maintain this. So there's the multi-phasic strategy I've created. You've got your refeed days, or it's refeed, aggressive refeed, which is 1 to 3 days, and you can pick it, and there's a selector. And really what we're trying to do there is, again, look at that research for those tiny small benefits from physiologically. We might maintain NEAT, bring NEAT back up a little bit. We might have some of these positive effects on leptin, T3, testosterone, etc. But realistically, there's lots of psychology in a planned aggressive refeed of certain foods. We're getting our fiber in, all of these good things, refilling glycogen stores, etc., etc. On top of that, there's so much, and I feel like it's maybe a bit overwhelming for people listening, but there's even stuff like when you lose weight and you stop dieting, most dieters will know that when you go back to maintenance calories, and this is what the industry doesn't discuss enough, positive weight regain. When you've been dieting and you stop dieting, you will automatically gain weight. And it's all lean body mass. You will increase your food intake a little bit or a lot, whatever. So you'll get increased gut contents. You'll get increased carbohydrate, glycogen in your muscles, etc. So again, I created this positive weight regain calculator so people would know what realm of weight regain is positive and necessary. So with these refeeds, I say to them, use the positive weight regain calculator, and you make sure you hit the upper end of that using a refeed. During maintenance phases, you can be more towards the lower end. But what it does is it reduces people's emotional state when it comes to the scale weight. So they see this massive jump, which binge restrict cycles are so heavily influenced by people who look at the scales. They live their life restricting, like you said, restricting in the week, and then maybe on the weekend or whatever, they overeat, hunger comes back, etc. But then they see the scale jump and they even start going, oh, bread doesn't agree with me. Every time I eat bread, even if I just have 4 slices, I'll just pile the weight on. And they've had a teeny bit extra sodium, they've increased their carbohydrate intake, whatever, or I'm intolerant to wheat or whatever. They just don't realize that they're living their life in a little bit of a glycogen depleted or glycogen sub-max state. And we all live in that state, given that our glycogen stores can inflate massively. And so this is part of why I get them to do these refeeds, is because psychologically it goes, oh, that massive regain in weight. And I know, because I followed all of the calculator's numbers with regards to my fat intake, my carbs, and my protein, and I teach them about de novo lipogenesis, there's no fat gain there. So they're like, oh, I've seen it go up by 5 pounds and I know none of that's fat gain. So, wow, this is changing my paradigm of what my weight means. So you've got your refeed periods, you've got then diet breaks, and you've got maintenance periods. And so with regards to long-term weight maintenance, this whole multi-phasic process, I've realized we've been talking for ages about your one question, but this all leads to this long-term weight maintenance that we want. Likewise, it will reduce, because it's intermittent energy restriction, it will minimize disinhibition. So we will not suddenly go, oh, we're at a party, we can we go on a binging spree, because we've allowed ourselves to have these periods where we had certain foods. Another thing that I think a lot of women have never experienced, and I'll say on average, but and I'll just say this because a lot of more men have it easier physiologically than women, and so there's a lot more hard gainer men. And so men who have eaten so much and wanted to pack on muscle and gained weight and whatever, and then they hate food, and they're like, I don't want to eat anymore. I've gained 10 kilos. I've put on some body fat. I'm hella strong, but I can't eat anymore. And a lot of female clients have just never experienced that. And so you give them an aggressive refeed where they're having to smash 4,000 calories in a day, but not of Haagen-Dazs, but just of these, there's a refeed food list that they stick to, which is hugely varied, but it's not Haagen-Dazs, but there's a bunch of sugary stuff, a bunch of nice sweets and whatever. But they're like, oh my God, that was tough going. By day 3 of it, they're begging to get back to their aggressive deficit because they're chilling. Digestion's fantastic. Mental clarity's fantastic. We actually didn't discuss these things. These are other benefits of the aggressive protocol. Like I will often, at the minute I'm aggressive dieting, not particularly because I need to lose fat, but because when I aggressive diet, I need less sleep. My mental clarity's through the roof. And digestion being better is just like a little nice side effect, but not a huge one for me. But yeah, they can't wait to get back to that. So they go through maybe 3 or 4, whatever cycles of aggressive dieting. They do their refeeds and they've actually learned so much about themselves. They've learned to appreciate the different sort of phases that they can be in. They're not as disinhibited. And I'm not sure you've ever heard of me talk about unconditional permission to eat, but I'm sure you're aware of people sort of talking about this.
I'd love to hear the context. I mean, the way that I had this conversation with a guy at the gym last night who was asking me, he's like, hey, I need a meal plan. I'm like, I don't do meal plans. But anyway, one of the things that this partly comes from Josh Hillis's philosophy towards nutrition. If you don't know him, you'd love him. He's great. But I will say
Josh Hill.
Hillis, there's a Josh Hill,
Okay.
and then there's a Josh Hillis, right? Or Josh Hills
Okay, cool.
and Josh Hillis.
Yeah.
But I'll say this to my clients all the time. It's like, you have permission to eat what you want, but you have to wait 15 minutes. You have to pause on it. You have to think about it. And then you have to see at the end of that, do you still feel like having it? Is it physiological hunger? Is it bored hunger? Oversimplification, but share.
Yeah. I just quickly Googled Josh Hillis. Yeah, I wasn't aware of him. He appears to follow me on Instagram, so I might give him
He's
a
a
follow
beauty.
back.
Great stuff, especially when it comes to emotional eating behavior. I've had him as a guest a couple times
Eating,
for the
stress
listeners.
eating.
He's a beauty. He wrote Fat Loss Happens on Monday with Dan John, what feels like a millennia ago.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed. I've not heard of him, so I'll read some more. Cool. So yeah, when I talk about unconditional permission to eat, I'm really drawing from, and this is good because it splits the crowd, but the intuitive eating stuff. And do you know what's hilarious? Actually, when we were in Edmonton, I don't know. Can I say this? Yeah, I probably can. Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna, and you can edit it out if it's not
Worst case, I'll
appropriate.
edit it out. Yeah.
Okay, cool. There was a guy there. Oh my God. This is one of my favorite stories to tell, but behind closed doors. This is the first time I told this publicly. We we were talking about, it was at one of the dinners. We went for kind of like speakers dinners and whatever. And it was on the last night. And I think so he was there, like Eric was there. And it was like a long table of us, right? I can't remember. It was like a burger place or something. Anyway, and there was this guy, and I didn't really know who he was, but he was super quiet. And I can't remember what nationality he was. But he had a lisp and he was super quiet and he was like really geeky. Oh, I think his name began with M. Anyway, he might have gone on to bigger and greater things. Anyway, we were discussing intuitive eating and some of what the kind of body positivity, intuitive eating, anti-diet movement, and when I say some of these, that can make people be like, oh, those guys are douchebags. And there's good and bad in those realms. Like some people are like, oh, no one should ever, you mentioned it earlier, people who go, you should never try and lose weight. It's pointless and it gives people eating disorders and it's terrible. So there are some douchebags in that realm, but there are some great people in that realm who whatever do good work. But this kid, I think it's like Manuel. Anyway, we're discussing it, and out of nowhere, super quiet, unassuming guy, he goes, I'm gonna do his lisp. So I'm not being mean. This is just how he talks, and it adds to the story. He goes, yeah, like man, if like I just want to eat, don't these people are just like, you want to eat donuts all day long? You can just eat donuts. Well, I want to eat pussy all day long, but I can't do that. And I was like, I laughed so hard. I was like, this unassuming little geeky guy who's not said a word. All the first thing he says, I want to eat pussy all day long, but I can't do that. And I was like, oh, it killed me. Anyway, it's like the best quote whenever I talk about unconditional permission to eat, I think of him.
Mm.
If you're out there and listening, message me.
Supply is the constraint on that particular thing. We're not going down that rabbit hole.
So yeah, so I have this quote that I've seen a lot of people. Someone posted on LinkedIn recently. You can eat anything, you just can't eat everything. And so it's just like trying to get some way across of people going, you have unconditional permission to nourish your body and eat anything. It's a bit like if it fits your macros, which is, decades old. You can eat a donut and lose fats. You can drink alcohol and lose fats. You can, have your favorite foods and lose fat. But there's certain things we need to discuss around that. And in the, intuitive eating world, people often are like, oh, you can just, eat your donut and you just eat as many of them as you want. And it's like, well, if I was to do that, then I'm giving into my physiology and I'm giving into my, my genetics, and not so much that I can just do that. I need to live like an adult and have some self-restraint. But I think what a lot of people don't really realize is the intuitive eating stuff is you're really working with someone. You're not working with someone on a physiological health parameter. You're not working with someone to get them a good body composition. A lot of where intuitive eating comes from is trying to fix someone's relationship with food. And once we do that, the problem is people go, you should never diet again, which is where I draw the line. It's no, we do need to maybe put some body fat on. We do maybe need to give ourselves that unconditional permission to eat. If you have foods that you just cannot eat without going into an uncontrolled binge, which leads to feelings of guilt, and, eating disorders are really fucking serious things. If we talk about the things that kill people, that's where it's at. So if we can do anything to help someone stay away from a bad relationship with food, it's really important, which is why I wrote the eating disorder section of the Aggressive Diet Blueprint, because I know for a lot of people, they're aware of it and they needed that data to see. So unconditional permission to eat helps with your long-term weight maintenance, because you don't end up with these good food, bad food, rigid dieting practices versus flexible dieting practices. We know that flexible approaches to nutrition, flexible approaches to dieting, flexible attitudes around food are the be-all and end-all of good health, lower BMI, all of these good things, lower binge tendencies, etc. You were going to say something a minute ago, sorry.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries, and the service isn't as much as you might think, and regular impulsive food delivery apps, eating out, that costs way more. Anyway, I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me Meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great. You can order custom meals. They deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes. Well, you brought up the eating disorder thing, so I think that's a good place. So I think there's two things I want to ask there, and you can pack them all together. One, is there any evidence, you already said it earlier, but is there any evidence to suggest that shorter, more aggressive diets are causal, contribute to eating disorder behavior? And then two, if you have someone who already has an eating disorder, what kind of, I doubt you would advocate for them to try this because we're dealing with something that's clinical here. But any boundaries around someone with, let's say, disordered eating behavior slash eating disorders? They are two slightly different things on a spectrum, and approaching this particular way to go. Do you caution those
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. Can I start with the second
Please.
one, just to say
Yes.
that people will criticize aggressive dieting protocols and go, well, if someone has, bad, disordered eating, or an eating disorder or history of eating disorder, they shouldn't be doing this, and you're bad, blah blah blah, criticizing me. And I'm like, so should they be doing a moderate deficit? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, exactly. That is not who I'm talking to. If someone has an eating disorder, I'm not going to talk to them about losing fat. If someone's suffering from something as horrible as anorexia or binge eating disorder, I'm not just going to be like, oh yeah, should we, like, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous concept. So people who are contraindicated from fat loss, that's just fat loss. It's not fast or slow. It's just fat loss.
Mm.
On to your first point, aggressive dieting, the speed with which you lose weight is in no way, shape, or form correlated to increases in disordered eating practices or eating disorders. So you use the word causal, which is like a get out of jail free card, but because sometimes things are sort of indirectly rated, but it's not. We know that dieting in general, there are links to, preoccupation with food, that they are part of the discussion around disordered eating and eating disorders. But, they're not causal. Like dieting is not causal to eating disorders as much as some people try and make you believe. But we know it's a factor. Anyone who's had an eating disorder is more likely to have had try to change their body weight, try and, restrict calories or something like that. So what's cool about this situation is I presented this at on one of our Mac Nutrition Live conferences. I was talking about a compassionate approach to aggressive dieting, I think. And we had an eating disorder specialist, dietitian, and researcher as one of the speakers on that day. And, one of my slides touched on this subject. And I was genuinely a little bit nervous, in a weird way, because I'm like, I've done my due diligence. I've read everything. I know I'm right, but I'm just like, oh, if you're gonna. So I sort of, I put up the data and I said, look, these are some studies. These are some of my thoughts. One of my thoughts is that your perception of restriction and how you approach restriction dictates its impact. So again, lots of people have used that quote of your perception of restriction dictates its impact. Because if your restriction is, I can't have this. This is, sugar's toxic. I can't have carbs because they're bad. They're fattening. Or, we even know that sufferers of celiac, people with celiac disease, are at much greater risk of eating disorder because they have to cut out that food. Now, people go, yeah, but that's healthy. They should cut that food out. And it's like, yeah, but did they choose to? They didn't choose to be celiac. So it's super interesting that it's like, someone else putting black and white thinking, moralizing, or good and bad foods actually has this psychological impact on people that basically increase their likelihood of disordered eating or eating disorders. So you obviously have to have the genetic tendencies and everything else that goes with it. But it is one of those key factors. So this is why black and white thinking, demonization of foods are so bad. And, we need not to do that as coaches. So, I put up this data and I glanced down at her and I was like, yeah. And she was like, and I was like, yes, good. Okay, cool. I'm sweet. I'm not going to get called out at my own conference. But since then, and I haven't met with her since, and I want to, because I talk about some of this stuff. I was very tentative to do this. Because are you aware that GLP-1s are being used in other addiction states, with
We're
like alcohol?
we're hearing a lot of really promising anecdotal stuff. It just seems
Mhm.
to, um, people have been prescribed GLP-1s for, either whether it's they're diabetic or obesity or anything under that umbrella, or they just get their hands on it and whatever. But they seem to be self-reporting on average.
Mm.
that they're just quitting things like drinking and I believe
Yeah.
gambling and other sort of addictions
Yeah. Yeah.
without any sort of other intervention, is what I understand.
Yeah, yeah. And so the research has caught up with that, and it's like super exciting. And it gives us this other area of like, oh, it's not just this slowed gastric emptying that's happening, and it's not just this impact in the gut. It seems to be impacting these areas in the brain with regards to reward, and that might be helping people who are chasing that feeling. And there is then some questions there of like, oh, are we really dampening someone's pleasure centers? So actually, are we going to start risking
Mm.
other issues? But different discussion. Um, but so now we've got this situation in the binge eating disorder research. Why are you smiling?
My thoughts just went something, where you get something that's so funny in your brain that you just like hold on to it. Okay, I'll
Yeah.
share. It made me think of, as I understand it, there was some medications, some treatments for Parkinson's disease, what some of the pathways that were problematic with Parkinson's. But what was happening was some of these people were going off and they were so disinhibited based on like whatever, I can't remember the science
Yeah.
behind it, but they were going and gambling and doing other really risky,
Oh,
highly
really?
addictive behavior. So it was going the other way.
Yeah.
And I might be overstating this, but I understand this happened. And
Sure.
some horrible shit was happening in these people's lives
Yeah.
who were struggling with Parkinson's because of this particular medication. And if anybody knows more about this, you're welcome to message me. But anyway, it's both
That's where your
horrifying, but
brain went.
also is quite funny. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Um,
side quest.
yeah. So in the binge eating disorder research, and we're talking fully clinically, DSM-5 criteria diagnosed binge eating disorder. Um, in this area of the research, what's really interesting is, and I'm sorry I don't know the authors, but again, people can reach out to me. And actually, the eating disorder section of my aggressive diet blueprint is freely available. So I will obviously be sending links to Andrew, and you can put it in the show notes, and people can just go and get the free stuff, and they can see. And again, I'll come up with something that some sort of special code. Do you have like like your podcast, like LFDH? Do you use that at all?
We can figure something out.
Yeah,
Usually people
we'll
just
do
use
like a
my name,
code.
but yeah. Yep.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I'll make sure there's something for people as a result of listening to me drone on. Um, but that is freely available. You can go and look at it. And you'll have all the data and the references and the graphs, whatever. But essentially, the research showing, yeah, these aggressive dieting approaches not leading to any greater incidences of binge eating. So it's
Mm.
in those who are not clinical. So it's like, cool, okay, at least in those who don't have it, we're not giving people issues. That's wonderful. It's not, because lots of people say that, oh, you're going to give people binge eating disorder. It's like, oh, okay, based on what? Because I'm basing it on just this clinical data, poor little me, silly me, just basing it on the science. That doesn't seem to be the case. What are you basing on? Oh, your opinion, right? Or my mum or whatever. Um,
To that
so
point, I think a lot
yeah,
of the stuff we're going through, there isn't any research or data to support a lot of these beliefs. And I think that's just it. Their belief and narrative. I think they're often
yeah,
moralized positions
yeah,
that
yeah,
people
definitely.
take. They're often very ideological. And when you pause, I mean, they've been repeated for so long, we take them as being fact and
Yes.
gospel, when in fact, this stuff just, there isn't the data to support this stuff. And I'm glad we're
Yeah.
actually tackling it all.
Yeah, it's crazy because even so, I first really talked publicly about this on a big stage in 2015. And that's 11 years ago now. In that time, I've seen friends and colleagues battling with, because they've been teaching people, they're educators, they're big social media personalities, they're whoever, telling people what I was telling people. I'm not guilt free in this. I spent the first 10-ish years of my career going moderate deficits, don't do any crash diets, they're silly. I've been there. We've all said it. Um, but seeing them battle with it, and seeing them maybe before they really did their due diligence of taking all the stuff that I was putting out and actually going and looking at it and going, oh shit, yeah, I should probably update my knowledge, and it's hard to pivot. or not pivot, but hard to just go, do you know what? I said this. And it's easy when when the data changes, like when the Tromlin paper on protein came out, the 100-gram dose and whatever. For me, that was like a pinnacle change in the protein research, where the data had changed and some of the stuff I had said, that paper changed it. And so I was like, I was clean. I was like, yeah, the science has changed, so we're all good. Whereas there's been other things I've had to come out, and then I'm like, do you know what? It's not that the science changed. It's just that I bothered to read it, and I was a bit of a dick for what I said. Yeah, I was telling you all that breakfast was the most important meal of the day. And I'll be honest, the data never supported it. It's just that everyone told me that, and I was taught that during my 3 academic degrees. But it turns out that that's not true. And so, yeah, it is difficult for people to go, do you know what? Yeah, this is 50 years of data. It's never been true that moderate deficit. It's just a moralized situation, and a sort of propaganda said so much it becomes truth. So with the binge eating stuff, the crazy thing that I guess I'll just finish on is a lot of binge eating disorder is patients are also living with obesity. And so there is often a self-inflicted, or even societally inflicted, desire to lose weight. And so they are binging and restricting in these cycles. So you don't want them really dieting and focusing on food, because that restriction is the very thing that then leads to these binges. And there's all sorts of other things, trauma, and there's so much to it. But in the research, and I'm not really sure how the ethics worked with this study or these sort of handful of studies, but binge eating frequency reduced in groups that lost weight using aggressive dieting type strategies. And it makes complete sense to me, because one of the key drivers in binging is hunger. And so within clinical, MNU certified nutritionists, people who go through our qualification, are handpicked to work in what's called the Health Education England's GSH binge eating program. So lots of people came to our course 10 years ago, like, I want to work with people with eating disorders or whatever. And we were like, you can't. You need to become a dietitian. Then you need to do specialist training in eating disorders. And you're not going to be the front line, because it's really a psychologist and psychiatrist job. But anyway, 10 years on, they're now being handpicked as part of a multidisciplinary team led by psychiatrists and eating disorder specialists. But when you work with these individuals, you essentially try to get ahead of hunger. You try and create meal regularity. You try and eat before hunger strikes, so that, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can switch off hunger completely, that's why my brain went to GLP-1 earlier, talking about the gambling stuff, whatever. If you can switch off completely, one of those key triggers for these people who do want to lose weight is gone. And so not only are you giving them a bit of purpose and a way of eating, etc. So anyway, I'm not telling anyone to go out and do this. That's my caveat of this podcast, is like, I'm not telling you to do this. You shouldn't do this. Categorically not. You shouldn't be working with these people with eating disorders. But in the research, when they do, shit got better, not worse. And so I just feel so strongly that anyone who comes at me and goes, you're going to give people eating disorders, I'm like, give me a single reference to support your moronic statement. And that's why I made the eating disorder part of the Blueprint free, because I'm like, go watch this and just try and pick any of it apart. I'll do you a favor. I'll show my hand of cards. You go and try do better, because I know they can't. Cool. I'll stop talking.
This episode is brought to you by KNKG, my favorite gym bag brand, and now my favorite backpack for travel. I used to travel like an amateur and check suitcase. This meant hassle checking in, waiting for luggage, and stress over whether my bag would make it to my destination with me. Even my roller carry-on didn't allow for versatility once I got to my destination. And I travel more than ever, and I need quality, durability, and convenience. And when I met up with friends at fitness conferences, I noticed many traveled just with a backpack. So I started researching backpacks and brands, and I kept coming back to KNKG because I've had one of their duffel bags for years, so I bought their Edge backpack, and it goes everywhere with me. And my KNKG backpacks, plural, now I have two of them, the Edge and the Conquer backpack, double as perfect travel bags for a week of travel or everyday gym use. And I can save you 15% on yours. Go to www.knkg.com/Andrew59676. That's www.knkg.com/Andrew59676, or go to the link in the show notes. All right. The one we've danced around a couple times is metabolic adaptation/damage. So, I mean, I'll preface with my understanding of the research, and I'll let you dive into it, tear it apart. Yes, we do have this like extreme anecdote that we always get waved around, which is the Biggest Losers, the before and later after. And it does appear that those people, given the extreme stuff that they were put through, they did not see their base metabolic rates, or their, let's say the metabolic rates. And I'll let you delineate the language later. Those did not return to what we expected. But in virtually all other cases, when people diet restrict, lose weight, regain weight, we can almost perfectly predict the decrease and then the increase in their metabolism. So the evidence, as I understand it, is there just isn't anything to support the idea of metabolic damage. And then you can explain the difference between metabolic damage and adaptation and everything around this.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, the metabolic damage, I think, was just like a word that got bandied around in the industry, and very quickly, I think, got called out, and even someone like Lane Norton was using it, and then he was like, do you know what? I've updated my stance. I don't like the word anymore. He went on a round table and was like, no, we were calling it that term, and actually damage is not the right word, because damage makes it sound like it's maybe irreversible, blah, blah, blah. And pretty much very quickly, everyone in the industry was like, yeah, metabolic damage isn't even a thing. One of the things as well, I will also say, is that you mentioned yo-yo dieting earlier, and a key part of part two of the blueprint, and that TLDR, you get a much more shorter summarized version of this, but is, yo-yo dieting also doesn't lead. So aggressive dieting doesn't lead to yo-yo dieting, one, because we don't have any greater regain and blah, blah, blah. But also, even if someone does yo-yo diet, they don't end up in a worse off place. And I think this is probably a good thing for a lot of your listeners to hear, maybe even outside of this discussion. So sorry, I'm a bit off topic, but it's a good one to touch on. Please. Is there's a belief that you do video on your podcast, right? People get to see.
This will be on YouTube. This will be on Spotify. Yep.
Amazing. So they can see my hands. So people believe, so this hand here is, this is our sort of stable person. They're let's say 80 kilos. And my fingers are someone's body weight. That's what we're talking about. And my thumbs are their essentially total daily energy expenditure. And so what we see is someone gains weight, their weight will go up and their metabolic will go up at the same time. So we know that individuals who are, way more burn more calories. And then what we know is if people lose weight, and we'll call that like a 10% weight loss, it doesn't come back down evenly like this. What we see is their weight comes down and their TDE goes down. And so the distance between my fingers and my thumb are essentially metabolic adaptation. That's the reduction in our metabolism as a result of dieting. And this is why living in a weight reduced state is difficult. And this is one thing that makes weight loss maintenance difficult. And it's something that we really want to try and tackle. And this doesn't obviously also equate for the fact that they're also hungrier. So they're the same weight they were before 10 years ago. They've dieted back down, but suddenly they have to eat less calories to maintain that weight. Now, there's certain little things maybe we could do to try and increase this a little bit, but the data at present is 50-50 on whether we can ever fully restore that back to where it was. So you essentially have to live in a weight reduced state. Now I have my own hypothesis that this can be corrected, and there's no real strong data currently to support this, but I will be proved right one day in the next 20 years. And if no one else does the study, I've already spec'd the study that needs to be done, and I just need a bit more profits from Mac Nutrition Uni, and I'll fund it myself. And so, but on the yo-yo dieting point, what people believe is happening is that you regain the weight, and my thumb and my fingers stay apart, so your metabolism is still lower. And then what they think is you diet down again and it gets bigger, and then you go like this. And people believe that your body composition changes, so you're going to have less fat and more muscle and blah blah blah, all these things. And the research just does not support this. There's just so many studies that show this isn't the case. So comparing RMR, comparing body composition, comparing TDE, etc., needs and whatever. So we'll start there with regards to this sort of discussion of why aggressive dieting and yo-yo dieting isn't an issue. And so metabolic adaptation, so metabolic damage doesn't happen. You're never damaged. You can always fix it by regaining the weight. A metabolic adaptation is real. And this going up and down doesn't get worse by going up and down more, and going down faster doesn't make the bottom fall out. It's literally that analogy I gave earlier of the rubber band. Rosenbaum is a great researcher historically in this area of it's how far you go from your set point. It's not how fast. And so this metabolic damage, this metabolic adaptation, it's not a metabolic damage isn't a thing. A metabolic adaptation is just a factor of weight loss, and we can't get away from it. Resistance training, funnily enough, does seem to attenuate some of the negative impacts of dieting on things like NEAT, but we're not getting rid of it altogether. So, it's as simple as that. There's just not this data that shows. And I will just say the Biggest Loser study, because I think that was Kevin Hall who went back and looked at that, and they did the follow up on these guys. That some of that data is, I don't want to say flawed. It's
Please.
No, it's too strong a word. It's confounded by the fact that, and James Krieger, who you mentioned earlier, is very good on this. On when you measure someone's metabolism, you must ensure that they are weight stable. And James has, I've heard him talk about this. I can't remember the context exactly, but maybe it was even, there's the Hansen study, the 2002 study. Maybe that is the Biggest Loser. But it's massive weight loss. That I think the study is called something like massive weight loss with maintenance of lean body mass still doesn't maintain resting metabolic rate. And so we still get, even if people go, oh, weight train whilst you diet, it's because you were a cardio bunny, that's why you rebounded weight. If you just weight trained, it wouldn't happen. Bullshit. If you retain all of your muscle during dieting, if you lose 10% of your body weight, you'll get some metabolic adaptation. And so there's a cool paper 2022, so it's not long ago, that actually looked at coming back to aggressive dieting and moderate deficits for Forgassi. It's, again, you never know how to, unless you've met the researcher, you don't really know how to say the names, but Forgassi 2022, Forgassi, something like that. But they looked at fast and slow weight loss. And the reason I know that paper is because they actually did find a very small reduction in resting energy expenditure. I think it was like, with aggressive dieting, it was slightly higher than the moderate deficit. And we're talking like 40 calories different or something. And, but as soon as it went back to 2 weeks of weight stabilization, there was absolutely no difference. So it's like, well, yeah, if someone's eating 1,000 calorie deficit and someone's eating a 2,000 calorie deficit, well, those things impact lots of the processes going on in our body. And actually, even something as little as the thermic effect of food is going to be impacted. So, that's the strongest evidence against me and my protocol and aggressive dieting and what I'm saying. And within 2 weeks of weight stabilization, the two groups. So there's absolutely no metabolic damage, and even metabolic adaptation is no different. So, that's really where the evidence rests.
Nailed it. We touched on this a little bit with the eating disorders, but are there any people that you would say are contraindicated for this approach? Because based on everything
Outside of
down, outside of someone with a dedicated eating disorder, and even then you explained and caveated your thoughts on that.
But so like outside of pregnant women,
Right.
as in you're not going to tell a woman who's just got pregnant, oh, let's do a diet, like of any sort. So outside of people, so I'm going to go out and say the only people that you wouldn't do this with, and bearing in mind what I said right at the beginning of the podcast, is we are not talking about a set calorie deficit, a set number of calories. We're not talking about a 390 calorie study, a 500 calorie study, a 790 calorie study. We're talking about Martin MacDonald's aggressive diet protocol that is the max fat loss for your physiology. The only person or group of people that I'd say couldn't do this, because the other one people come at me with is perimenopausal and postmenopausal women. That's a cool discussion because, it causes stress. Oh, it's not about calorie deficits for them. It's about hormones, blah, blah, blah. So we could talk about that. But is athletes who, and when I say athletes, half the Gen Pop is an athlete these days because they're training for High Rocks and CrossFit. And they're literally doing more hours of training than some of the professional athletes I worked with at the Olympics. So when we're talking about athletes, what I mean by that is you have a performance goal, i.e., you're trying to get a PB in the marathon and your sponsorship or whatever, something depends on it. And your biggest goal is your performance. Again, coming back to people like Steve Hall, coming back to like the 3DMJ type crowd, often people go, well, you wouldn't use this approach with bodybuilders because the muscle loss. And I'm like, yeah, you would. Because the reason the likes of 3DMJ clients and 3DMJ athletes and the dudes themselves are so freaking good is because they literally, I remember seeing Alberto and Eric, and I think maybe the whole crowd were there talk. And I think they had a thing at the time, was like they wouldn't let someone work with them unless they were minimum 24 weeks out from a show, and ideally a year, because they would want to do like a build and a main gaining and all their cool words that they come up with before working with them. But these guys diet. You look at Alberto Nunes, and I still remember Alberto posting a picture of himself. Are you aware of Alberto?
Yeah, he's great. I should eventually get him on the show because I've never had him on here.
He's quite a philosophical guy. I don't know him well, and I sort of just know a bit about his bodybuilding stuff, but he's cool. He's got an interesting brain. But just as I more fanboy him because he's a freak in terms of his physique. He's just like, but he posted a picture of himself 12 weeks out from a show, and he had shredded glutes. He was so insanely lean. And I remember Alan Aragon commented, and he was like, Alberto, he's like, I'm sure you know what you're doing, but I'm really interested that you see this as 12 weeks out. And Alberto was just like, this is what it takes these days, Alan. Like, this is the natural bodybuilding scene now. This isn't stage ready anymore. And honestly, I'd love to be able to just show the listeners the picture of him but again, you see what he looks like on stage, and he is freaky lean. But the point I'm making here is I did in the research review a 9% case study getting to 9% body fat, and it told you 380 calorie deficit approximately. Think if you're getting sub 9, 8, 7, whatever, the calorie deficit gets even lower. So then equate that, if the listeners are all comfortable with the thing of like, well, 3,500 calories approximately to lose a pound of fat. You think how many days at a 300 odd calorie deficit just to see a 1 pound loss versus when you're able to have a 500 to 1,000 calorie deficit, etc. It becomes a totally different ball game. So your last bit of fat loss is so strenuously or painstakingly long because your body just can't supply the fatty acids for your energy demands. So anyway, you can calculate where that should be. And so I'm like, no, bodybuilders, especially natural bodybuilders, should be using my protocol because it will stop them losing muscle. It will stop them trying to push the envelope. Lots of guys will get to 4 weeks out and go, I'm not where I need to be. Let's push the deficit. And all that does is lead to lean body mass loss, but they don't know where that figure lies. So for me, I've taken them off the list. Bodybuilders should absolutely, physique athletes should absolutely, people with lots of body fat, lean people, athletes in off seasons.
And that's the one I was thinking most is if you have athletes, because different type of athletes have different competition schedules and types of off seasons. But if you have a narrower window where if, let's say, losing some body fat is going to help them with their performance, then the narrower window makes a lot of sense because that's less time that they're in that restricted state, more time that they can be well fueled for performance, for training, for building muscle, performance, etc.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. When I talk about athletes, it's like if you have time off, you can do it. The only reason you can't do it is because if and even then a moderate deficit still would be rubbish. Like if you're a triathlete in competitive season and you're doing insane amounts of training, even a moderate deficit's a bit crap. You probably shouldn't be doing it. But again, in that situation, that's when I put that caveat in. If performance is important, maybe not an aggressive diet, but even a moderate deficit could be problematic. But yeah, I worked in professional football, soccer, for 5 seasons. And off season, they would come to me and say, Martin, can you give us a Vegas plan? And I'm like, a what? Like a Vegas plan. We're all off to Vegas in the off season, in the holidays. And I'm like, you barely listen to my nutrition advice whilst getting paid £1 million, a month. And now you want to listen to me because you're not playing and you're just going to Vegas because you want abs. But honestly, it's how I got buy-in at that level. It was so hard to change the culture, when you've got 18-year-olds with more money than they know what to do with. And they're kind of comfortable and they don't care that they're not going to be on 250 grand a week. They're happy with their 20 grand a week. Who wouldn't be, to kick a ball about? And that, the training sessions are very, very easy. But anyway, how I got the buy-in was, just working with the people in front of me. I spent my first season in professional football basically telling the best alcoholic drinks to drink, which is the optimal choice of that. And they're like, oh, this guy's sound. I might listen to him a bit more. And, it took me a few seasons to actually get them to listen to anything helpful. But my answer to your question is athletes with performance goals, but honestly, absolutely everyone else. And I will say, the best people it's for is people who struggle. It's the clients that this is the thing I think has been wonderful to see is people being able to get results with clients they have never been able to get results with before. When the game is against them, as women with PCOS, women who are small in stature, women who are inactive, people with high appetites, people who don't realize that they're underreporting, because actually that greater restriction just narrows the room for error. And it's just been phenomenal to see just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these testimonials of, either people using my aggressive diet blueprint, or, loads and loads of coaches now have just built whole businesses and whole protocols using the blueprint and the calculators. And I will go out and say, I'm absolutely fine. I had a message just yesterday from someone saying, I bought the blueprint, I've studied it all, I think you're amazing. And I've repackaged it. I'm not calling it the aggressive diet. Is that okay? I make reference to you in anywhere that I've used your exact work. And, I produced a whole bunch of client documents that go with the aggressive diet. I'll be using these and your name's still on them, etc. I don't care about people. I want this. I want the world to get these. I'm not about trying to gatekeep it. I spent 10 years giving it all away for free. And, people have built massive businesses and are coaching clients very, very well, doing what people are like, oh, this is a scary protocol. And people even doing it themselves, people going, oh, I'm a nobody, I know nothing, but they just watch the little mini things. They use all the resources, they use the calculators, and they nail it because it's just all there. So it's for everyone, but those guys that will help the most. And, largely because of the hunger impacts and the impact that has on adherence and the results.
You mentioned menopausal, perimenopausal women with limited time left. I mean, just something quick on, some of the narratives against that. You mentioned the whole like stress and hormones thing, which is mostly packaged up rubbish when it's presented on social media. As somehow it like changes the rules in that context. Yeah.
So sorry, what's the question exactly?
Is
Because
there,
otherwise I'll go off.
all right, is there any evidence to contraindicate that population?
Um, I'll give you the actual evidence that is worthwhile being aware of.
Mm.
And it's a really cool paper, Seimon. I'm not making it up, but it's Seaman et al. That's not a joke. And this Seaman et al. Paper is super cool because they followed postmenopausal women doing an aggressive diet, very, very aggressive. Or I will call it actually very, very rapid. They didn't use a good protein protocol within this study. They didn't do any resistance training. They didn't recommend any particular activity, let's say, that we might encourage that population to do. And they looked at the effects of this and they did a really nice follow-up. I think it was 2020 and then 2022. So a 2-year follow-up on these groups, which is obviously fantastic because we don't normally have decent follow-up over that many years. So they looked at obviously metabolic rate, they looked at weight regain. And, if people have got up to this point in the podcast, they're going to know the outcome. Aggressive dieting absolutely smashed any kind of moderate deficit. However, the one parameter which we know this group is at risk for was bone mineral density. Now, what two things do we really want people to pay attention to when obviously in this situation we've got dramatically reduced estrogen levels, which is contributing to this bone loss? We don't want them to go low protein and we don't want them to not do exercise. So we want some exercise that creates this osteoblastic activity. Resistance training is one of those modes that can be useful. We definitely don't want them to be low protein. And we're talking stupidly low because we're talking like dietitian telling someone to do, I'm not hating on dietitians too much. We've got obviously lots of dietetics lecturers on Mac Nutrition Uni, but the old school dietetics handbook of, I saw one the other day, 0.76 grams per kilogram. So what would that be? Less than what, 1.4, 1.5 grams
per
No,
pound.
sorry, it would be like less than zero point 0.3 grams per pound protein. But you know, at the end of the day, we've got these RDAs, RNIs, whatever, and it's like the amount of protein we need not to get kwashiorkor and, you know, basically protein malnourished. Cool, great, let's set protein there. But then you put someone on 400 calories a day, well, whatever, they're screwed. And then most of that is, you know, I think they're on like 0.6, 0.5, so we're talking like 0.2 grams per kilogram protein. Anyway, just terrible, terrible, terrible low protein intake, no resistance training, and they reduce their bone mineral density. Now, that's the worst data I've seen against aggressive dieting in postmenopausal women. Basically, my aggressive diet's not going to be as stupid and rapid as that. We're going to maintain protein, and you know, resistance training is a non-negotiable for people doing my aggressive diet protocol. Done. This whole idea of hormones and perimenopausal stuff, I've got lots and lots and lots of thoughts about it, which I probably won't articulate hugely well in the time that we've got. Maybe we should do a whole podcast on it. But
Sure.
it's a bit like, I don't know if you're aware of this. My clinical nutrition, I chose to do my research project on PCOS. So PCOS has been my big, and obviously PCOS now, I'm going to have to start remembering it, has now been
PMOS,
rebranded.
yes. I'm going to do an
Yeah.
episode with, if everything goes according to plan, with Dr. Dwayne Jackson. I'm bringing him back. He's
Nice.
brilliant. And we're probably going to, because I need to have a resource on what just happened, like this thing, everybody's posting about it.
Yeah.
So, and then absolutely, we'll bring you back if you want to talk about this particular topic, but we could probably deep dive into that as well. So we'll see.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So if people aren't aware of what we've just said, it's like it's polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome now, and which is cool. It's a nice update from the name. If things are going to change, I don't know. I'm doing a post on this on Monday to discuss it. But I did my research project in PCOS, and so for a decade it was my thing to talk about, and you know, have lots of wonderful stories of people having babies as a result of some of the lectures I've delivered around the world on this, and so these situations of people going, you shouldn't be dieting, you know, perimenopausal women, the stress of causing this, it's not to do with calories, and just, and you know, women with PMOS have certain factors that will make weight loss potentially harder. One of those not being metabolic rate, but likely being some of the signaling around appetite. And it's the same situation when we, like estrogen, there's so many quacks out there who go, oh, you're estrogen dominant, you need to take these supplements. You know, are you a woman and do you suffer from this? You're estrogen dominant, do these things. It's estrogen making you fat. That's why women are fatter than men, because of estrogen. You know, completely forgetting that estrogen is this anorexigenic hormone, which actually helps women with their appetite. So these reductions in estrogen that happen during this perimenopausal and postmenopausal period are impacting energy intake, or no, sorry, they're impacting appetite. Now, the problem is, and it's a very touchy area because there's lots of horrible things that go on in this perimenopausal period. And people saying, you know, I'm exercising the same, I'm eating the same, nothing's different. Now, there's lots that goes on in terms of that we just cannot control for. And this is why, as humans, we're dumb, and why the scientific method is wonderful, because we are incapable of stepping back and seeing everything that's possibly changing. And you mentioned earlier about misreporting, and I didn't laugh too hard when you said it, but I almost said, you know, you're more of a cynic than me because you use this thing of 1200 and 2200. So that's like a misreporting of 1,000 calories, which the evidence does support. But whenever I discuss it, I always use 600 because it sounds less harsh than going, you lie by a factor of basically 100%. But it's one of those things when I say things are harder for women, than men. It's lots of these different reasons that the interplay of hormones, the fluctuation of hormones for females, with with the luteal phase being this phase where appetite changes and metabolism changes, etc. That's outside of the discussion on metabolic adaptation and stuff that might occur there. And then outside of this much harder situation of perimenopause, where fatigue can be a factor, and just lots of things that will change lifestyle and activity levels in ways that maybe people don't see. And then you've just got so many people preying on the desperation of perimenopausal, postmenopausal women. Redistribution of fat is a thing. And I've spoken about this a lot. We had a menstrual cycle and menopause conference. We had two great experts, Alyssa Olnick and
she's amazing.
Dr.
She's been on a
Nikki
couple of
Keith.
times. Alyssa's
Amazing.
fantastic. Yeah.
Wonderful. And it was this discussion of like belly fat increasing in this perimenopausal period. And I sort of just, I end up discussing this redistribution of body fat being one of the key issues where people go, I'm eating the same, I'm exercising the same, but my belly is getting fatter, so I'm gaining fat. But actually what's happening is this redistribution. It's the release of these fats, the esterification of fats, and then the re-esterification in different parts of the body, because you've got a totally different hormonal profile. So it might feel like you're gaining fat, but actually your body weight's stable, but you're just getting more fat on your tummy. And so there's lots and lots and lots of factors to dig into. And then you've got people like Dr. Mary Claire, who's just I didn't realize how much of a charlatan she was. And I need to call myself out because I did a mini call out on her. Basically, she said calorie deficits don't reduce visceral fat. And I was like, literally, it's the most powerful thing to impact visceral fat, which is obviously an issue for women in this period. And she's supposed to be this beacon of light for women, and I want to empower women. It's like she bullshits and she just cares about herself, practically a sociopath. But the problem was, at the time, I didn't do my due diligence of realizing how much of a charlatan she was. I just did a quick skim and I saw some nice positive messages. So I said at the beginning of my post, people go and look at it, it's not that long ago, and I said, this woman, Dr. Marie-Claire, she seems to post some helpful stuff for women and whatever. But she's got this wrong. She's completely and utterly wrong. She's doing what a lot of people do and just lie about calorie deficits and try and tell you it's something to do with hormones, blah, blah, blah. And obviously we also know, I'll say this on air, visceral fat in perimenopausal women is affected by more than just calorie deficit. And there are other things that might relate to hormones, things like exercise and sleep, and fatty acid profiles that might actually help us above and beyond a calorie deficit. Cool. But that doesn't mean that calorie deficits don't work. It's just these things are additive. So anyway, but then I've later seen, because I started following her, that she just posts the biggest amount of crap, and she basically just wants to make money, as far as I'm concerned.
If you're not familiar with Amanda Thebe, who is
Yeah, I
actually,
am.
she's fantastic. So I've had her as a
Yeah.
guest. She was recently
Oh,
speaking at an
cool.
event I was attending. And but anyway, she's my go-to when it comes to, and she's not a doctor, but she's great at
Yeah.
translating the
Yeah.
information from her
Yeah.
scope of practice. And she relies heavily on Dr. Jen Gunter, who's probably the
She's
best
a legend.
resource when it comes to the
Yeah.
menopausal space. And then
Yeah.
also calling out a lot of this bullshit and misinformation from these prominent charlatans. I've had Dr. Lauren Colenso Semple on a few times, and she
Yeah.
is
Cool.
fantastic. So you've just joined the annals of a library of guests that I'm very proud of. I think are doing
No.
amazing work. We've talked about many of them today. Uh, People can find you because this has been probably the longest episode on record. Uh,
Wow. Oh my
at
God. Yeah.
Martin Nutrition, they can go
Yeah.
there. But what else do you want to direct people to? And obviously, what you have for people to check out more of your resources, I will have links in the show notes for this.
Cool.
But I mean, what do you want to throw at people now?
Yeah. You've done probably the best one. My Instagram, the link in my bio is Martin-MacDonald /links. And if you just type that into any browser, that basically brings up all the different things that I do. So the aggressive diet blueprint is on study-nutrition.com. And but I just think if you go there, you can get all the links, and I'll maybe send that to you to put the link in the
Please.
show notes, whatever. But I will just say, like, if people are coaches, trainers, people wanting to, I guess, take their nutrition knowledge and coaching to the next level, that's mac-nutritionuni.com. I'm not 100% sure if I linked that, but I guess that's my main job. We've talked about just aggressive diets in particular, but that's the thing I'm most proud of. That's the thing that I guess launched me to stardom or whatever it is, changing the industry, like bringing about the first ever sort of truly evidence-based nutrition qualification. So those are the two things that if people want to see more, but like I'm active on social media. I do spend a lot of time trying to reply to every single DM I get. So even if I send people to a member of my team, I've got loads of amazing staff that will help people. So those are the things. But I think if people have got this far and they click on the links that you put in the show notes, they'll be all good. Yeah.
Good. I mean, your nutrition course certification is possibly the highest regarded in the industry. And there's a lot of really good stuff, but it's widely considered the gold standard. It's more in depth, it's longer than its contemporaries, which are all good. And I know my friend Marco, who shout out Marco, he's a regular listener. I know he's gone through it and he really loves it as well. And I have a client of mine, Dal, who we actually recently went through a protocol inspired by your work, where it's a short phase of a more aggressive diet. And again, very dedicated resistance training. We actually saw her see some strength personal bests within that phase. She maintained muscle very effectively. She did lose weight, and she didn't find the experience particularly difficult. And anyway, so that worked really well. So she's even thinking about doing your program. So we'll see. But I know it's great, and I can't endorse enough. I've loved your media for a very long time. It's an honor to finally get you on here. So thank you.
It was amazing when you first asked me to come on the podcast. I just clicked on it and scrolled through the people, and like I think I counted 5 of our graduates have been guests. So obviously we've been going for 10 years.
Who came through? If you
so
was Luke Hanna one of yours? I wouldn't be surprised.
Luke Hanna's one. Rachel
Henley. She's amazing.
Even the legends, Spencer Nadolski did it way back in the day.
He's great.
Mike Dola, I think.
Oh, Mike was on recently. We were actually talking about if anybody's listening and is a nutrition coach. Recently I had Mike on and we were talking about a lot of the factors, changes, forces going on in the nutrition coaching world, whether it's the intersections of AI, GLP-1 stuff, some of these legacy companies that have been big coaching companies, including his own Stronger You that he founded and sold years ago, which recently shut down. So there's some big shifts. So if you guys are interested in what's going on and what works, Mike Dola is a god of this stuff. So yes.
But yeah, it's just cool. And I appreciate the shout out. It's like it's nice that it's even John Berardi, who created Precision Nutrition. He gave me a shout on a podcast recently, and he's like the godfather of like behavior change and slow deficits and like not even calorie counting. And he was on a podcast and he name dropped me. Someone messaged me and goes, "You never guess." And he was like, and me and John have exchanged words and like friendly words and whatever, but he was like, "Yeah, Martin MacDonald and his aggressive diet stuff, it's changing the paradigm of coaching, blah, blah." And I was like, sugar, this is cool. It's just nice, isn't it? The recognition, and just the course is so much bigger than me now. We're in our 11th, 10th year. So it's nice to hear that people are getting good stuff from it. It's nice to know that you're aware of people who are thinking of doing it. So, and again, the aggressive diet blueprint, if you do Mac Nutrition Uni, the qualification, all of our students and graduates get the blueprint for basically half price. So anyway, lots of benefits. I don't want to sell too much, but it's all stuff I truly believe in. And so, yeah, I think it's had a good impact on people.
I won't be surprised if someone goes, "Okay, cool, I got to go check this out." So again, I can't say it enough. I've endorsed you for years. I've been telling people about your course, your certification for years. And it's an honor to finally get you on here. And like we talked about, we'll figure out if we can get one on some of the topics that we wanted to dive more into. So we'll
Cool.
have to bring you back. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much.